Okay, our next section here, problems of transition. And let's just start off with this idea that recently, in the last 20, 30 years, the trend has been, maybe 40 years even, that countries are going from communism to some form of a mixed market economy. We saw this with the Soviet Union in 1990. China really started in 1976. And even countries like Cuba and Chile and Sweden are moving in the direction of more market economy, less socialism. Um, so all of the Eastern European Soviet bloc countries, your Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, they all transitioned quickly with the help of the EU, with the Western Europeans, the EEC, the European Economic Community, or the eventual EU, to help them transition to capitalism. Now, before that, for say 50 years, right, looking back 60 years, the trend had been more socialist, that all countries, including the United States, had gone more socialist from, say, 1915 to 1975. In that 60-year period, we saw that almost every country in the world moved towards more socialist than more capitalist. And some countries went full socialist communist, your China's, your Soviet Unions, your Cubas, and then others kind of found a middle ground, and there's been a slow pulling back in the direction of capitalism. Although in the United States, it's arguable that the United States has become maybe a touch more socialist over the last few decades. Obamacare specifically is a program that is pointed at as being more of a socialist program. Anyways, this is the background, and the question is, what are some of the challenges if you do choose to go from full, communist or very communist, very socialist, Marxist socialism to a mixed market economy? And that's kind of what we're going to focus on more than anything today. All the slighter variations, the US was pulling back on its social programs in the 80s and 90s. And then in the last 10 years or so, like I said, 15, we've seen a few social programs added in. Those little incremental changes aren't what this is about. What we're about today are the big changes, right? And one of the big changes is that if the government owns the businesses, who's going to take over? In Russia, after the fall of the Soviet Union, this was a huge problem. And the 90s were horrible, horrible times for Russian people. Poverty was through the roof. It was way worse than it was under the Soviet Union. I mean, under the Soviet Union, there wasn't a lot of extras, but people had enough. And in the 90s, all of the businesses just got gobbled up by the rich, by the rich oligarchs, the government officials, people like Vladimir Putin, right, who became the president. He is a multi-billionaire because in this period, he was part of the group that got the businesses. The oil company started off going to a private company and then was taken over by the government. So now Russia is moving back in a more socialist direction again in the last 10, 15 years or so. But how do you do that fairly? How do you move from a communist or a Marxist socialist government to a more mixed economy? We saw that in Poland and Czech Republic and Hungary, the Eastern Bloc countries, the Europeans came in and they tried to set up a system where vouchers were given, where it was a lottery of sorts. Who's going to get what businesses, and do you have the money for it? It wasn't just the rich took over everything. They tried to give other regular people a chance to take over some of the smaller businesses as well. One of the challenges is also lack of political power. People don't like to lose power. And we're going to find that this is going to be a challenge, is taking power away from people. It's always a challenge. Sometimes people don't even want to leave their jobs as president. Also, the population in general is oftentimes not prepared to move into a capitalist economy. They don't quite understand the laws and the rules and the tax codes and what it means to start your own business and how to take loans and how to file for bankruptcy. This is a complex system, and it really you really do need to take a slow, fostered, guided, scaffolded, helping hand around these countries that are transitioning, or else oftentimes you're going to see that, at least for that first decade, like in the Soviet Union and Russia, things will get worse before they get better. And then sometimes, like in Russia, things get worse, and out of desperation, they choose a strongman leader like Putin, who then, right, um, implements socialism again, or a type of socialism. And maybe that's fine. I mean, Russia is not pure communist. Maybe they're happy with their middle of the road style socialist government, or maybe a little bit of a mixed socialist economy. But we also have seen historically that mixed market economies are more successful. And if you have a democracy, you can then elect someone who agrees with the socialist changes you want to make. And then as a country, you can decide, we do want Social Security, right? We have that choice. Who we choose in our leadership of our country over the next 20, 50 years will decide whether or not you get Social Security, whether or not Social Security taxes are taken out of your paycheck. Because if you don't get Social Security, then eventually that tax will stop. So these are the choices that we have to make. In democracies, the people we choose determine what level of socialist programs we have in our government. But in an authoritarian government, the government chooses, and oftentimes they choose programs that benefit themselves. Surprise, surprise. So it's a tough balance. Look, democracies are messy. Capitalism is messy. Things aren't always going to be perfect. They're probably never going to be perfect. They might not even be 90% perfect. And oftentimes we're aiming for 80% and just saying that's better than, that's better than this, right? It's better than the government making all the choices. And of course, they benefit themselves before they benefit the average person. So